Good evening and welcome to the Sound Off Show. My name is Linda Kirker. I host the program and I'm so glad that you joined us tonight. I think you're going to find this show to be very interesting and informative. And I have two really good guests, one who's been on the program before and one who's brand new to the show. Before I introduce them, though, I would like to share something with you that I put together late this afternoon. Excuse me. Here we go. These are trying times for the American people. It feels like we are on the edge of a cliff with all of the unrest that is being funded and encouraged by anti-American zealots. Then there is the Chinese coronavirus that has disrupted our daily lives, our jobs, schools, businesses, churches, law enforcement, and healthcare throughout the nation. There's only one solution, as I see it. The founders of this nation knew that when the citizens are given rights and freedoms, that they must stand up to protect those gifts that many people around the world do not enjoy. We cannot take our freedoms, rights, and opportunities for granted, or our children and grandchildren will one day say to us, "Why didn't you fight to protect those precious, unique rights, freedoms, and opportunities for us?" It is time to wake up, folks. We must be strong and tough and fight back. We must also stop the federal government takeover of schools, health care, and soon private property. The U.S. Constitution does not give the federal government any right to control education or health care. Look it up. The more that government takes over, the less control we have over our individual lives. Just take a look at the recent disappointing test scores of our school children. We are paying a lot of money for education or indoctrination in Vermont schools. Our children must learn U.S. history in school, because they are the future defenders of their rights, freedoms, and opportunities. They must be taught work ethic and must understand why they are free to be the best that they can be in this precious nation of liberty. May God bless America. That is my opener, friends. So with that, I would like to introduce my two guests. To my far left is Norm Gosselin. Norm is from Georgia, as am I, the town of Georgia, that is. And Norm's been on the program before, and I welcome you back.
Thank you, Linda.
And thanks for coming on. And next to me is a new person, a new guest on the show, Michael Hall, former police chief of Manchester, New Hampshire.
Vermont.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's my first blunder. Thank you for the correction.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
Manchester, yeah, okay. Anyway, Manchester, Vermont. And you've done so much more, which I want the people to hear about, but it's an honor to have you here, and thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes, well, when I heard you speak recently, I think it was off the cuff. You just wanted to say something at the meeting in Montpelier, and I was listening intently, and I said to myself, I have to talk to that man. So afterwards, when everybody was kind of disassembling, I found you and invited you to the show, and I'm so glad you drove the 3 hours to get here with your lovely wife.
You're welcome.
Okay, so where would you like to start? I'm going to let you, we have so many things going on in this country today. What's happening with law enforcement, which you have been, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and some of the things you've been in business, you're a married man with a daughter.
Sure. Well, I'm probably a little bit of a rarity in the sense that I was actually born and raised in Manchester in the Arlington area in southern Vermont. Went to the local schools there, and I don't know if I'm dating myself or not, but I was the last class that actually went to a one-room schoolhouse in Bennington County and probably Vermont, although I don't know that to be a fact. So when I got out of high school in the early 70s, basically you had one of three choices. You either went to college, went to work, or went in the military. I chose to go to work. It was kind of on the tail end of the Vietnam War, and the service wasn't that appealing at that time for a number of reasons, much similar of what we're experiencing today. But I worked a number of different jobs in manufacturing and logistics, and my calling was always to work in law enforcement. I ran as a local constable and eventually got hired on by the town of Manchester, where I spent 36 years and retired a year ago this month.
That's a long time.
As the chief of police. And I have one daughter who went to local schools in southern Vermont, took her college education out in Columbus, Ohio area, and has never returned home. So I know a little bit about what people face here in Vermont. And, given my experience in law enforcement, I served every level, socioeconomic level there was. And it really gave me a good, clear understanding of how people at different levels and socioeconomic tiers live and what some of their problems are.
I'll get to Norm in just a second because I want to hear some of what he's done as well. But what baffles me so much is, well, as I look at the big picture today and the socioeconomics, as well as the coronavirus and all these uprisings and everything, I have a hard time understanding. Well, let me say this first. I believe that a lot of the problems start with dysfunctional families. If children don't have a solid family structure to grow up in, where they are taught respect and manners and work, then they're kind of lost, I think. Maybe not all of them. You can have one parent, a really great parent, and they can do all those things for a child or children. But we know that 70% of the black children don't have a dad in the family. That's sad.
Absolutely.
But you would hope that any dad that might be there would be a great influence in the child's life. But why are there so many people who are in the environment that you were just describing, where they don't have money, they don't have jobs, they don't have homes, whatever? Why? There are so many jobs in Vermont that need to be filled. Right now, it's a little tough because of the virus. But once the businesses open up, before this virus came, there were signs everywhere in Franklin County. We're hiring.
Well, this is a little bit off topic of law enforcement profession, but I can tell you that, in my opinion, Vermont doesn't have a worker shortage. We have a shortage of people who want to work. And basically, the problem with that is that we've made it too easy for people not to have to work.
Amen.
There are too many safety nets. There are too many things that, fall down. Now, with some exception, there's very few people that cannot and could not be doing something.
I agree.
Regardless of whatever kind of benefits they may or may not be getting. If, they would feel better about themselves if they were doing something productive. And, again, what I say to people is walk up and down Main Street in any state, any city in the state of Vermont, or any size town that has any size of population, anywhere between 8 a.m. and 5:30 at night, and look at the number of able-bodied young men and women that we see every day that they don't have jobs, they hang out at the corner stores and those kind of things. Now, some of those folks, justifiably, for mental health reasons or medical reasons or whatever, cannot work. But I think we have such a high number of people that are so dependent upon the social service system that we've cut ourselves short here.
I agree with that, and I think that one way that government can assume more power over people is to make people dependent on government. People who are dependent on government can be controlled.
Well, I think you're seeing that with the current pandemic situation, whereby you're paying people $600 a week plus unemployment to stay home, and then when the business turns around, you can't recruit the people to come back to work because it's more advantageous for them to stay home. Now, I understand that that's kind of a unique situation because of the pandemic, but that same situation exists with some of the other programs that take place here in Vermont.
Yes, and I'll get right to you in a minute, Norm. One of my concerns, and something that I have advocated for a while now, is that we need a state audit of the Department of Education and the Agency of Human Services to make sure that what we are doing doesn't run counter to actually doing the best thing for the people by empowering them as much as possible, much as they are able, to have some level of independence from government.
Well, we're talking about social services, also known as welfare benefits and those kind of things. And what I can tell you is Vermont does not do a good job of policing that. And I can speak to that from a law enforcement perspective. Back when we were doing a number of search warrants and raids throughout southern Vermont for drugs a few years back, it would be quite unusual to do a raid of a drug house and not come out of there with Vermont EBT cards, which are the equivalent of a debit card that the state issues for state benefits. And, my question was with our prosecutor, hey, I don't care where you're making your money from. If you're selling drugs, you're employed. It may not be legal, but let's go after these folks for welfare fraud. And what we found was that the state's not very willing to release that information even to law enforcement, and they'll tell you it's confidential and they don't care to disclose that information. And, I really, really believe that if Vermont had some sort of system of checks and balances of going out and doing a face-to-face audit, I suspect, and I don't know this, but I suspect, we're mailing checks to dead people from the federal government. My guess is we're sending benefits to people that don't even live in the state of Vermont.
And those people are going to vote, too.
Well, yeah, but the problem with that is, and, it used to be when you had welfare benefits, and I know some people in my own family over the years that were in the program for a while, you had certain currency that you used for that, and they did away with that because it was a little shameful to stand there at the counter in front of your friends. But still, the same thing happens today. When they swipe the card, they pay a different amount than you do. But with the technology that's available today, these folks, they can use those EBT cards on anything. You can go buy anything with
It
that.
used to be just for food,
Correct.
and it needs to go back to that.
Correct, and with the technology that's available today, I think they could do that very easily.
Well, how are we going to, let me ask Norm this, how are we going to get the government to do the right thing instead of disabling and enabling people to be dependent? What can we do as a state? What can we do as citizens and legislators to say, we've had enough of this? We want a thriving state with people who are independent and hardworking and contributing instead of taking. We all know there are some people who absolutely need help, and that, as a former nurse and a caretaker, I understand that. And those people sincerely need our support. But beyond that, we have a lot of people who are just using the system. So do you have any ideas on, or suggestions on how that might be addressed? What the people could do? I don't know.
Well, first, before I go on and lead on to something, I want to, before we forget it, I want to, having met the chief for the first time tonight, I want to thank him for his service.
Thank you.
And I want to thank his brothers and sisters in blue and green for serving. We need them. We don't need to defund the police. We need to increase the funding.
Yep.
If you defund or abolish the police as in defunding, why not just defund Congress for a poor job done? If my memory serves me correctly, they spent 3 years trying to impeach a president that we legally, duly elected with my money. So anyway, government needs to be held accountable. And
that's our job as citizens.
I'll talk about that in a little bit here, but we need to be mindful of what's going on as citizens. I shared with you, Linda, one time before the Obama election, way back when, I read 7 books because you allowed me to vote. The chief allowed me to vote. I figured the least I could do was vote consciously and know what I was doing. I'm a firm believer. I think people should take a test before they vote because they go by, it's like Kellogg's cornflakes. Pat Leahy, this guy, Bernie Sanders, Welch, and so they don't, people need to be mindful of what's going on.
Knowledge.
And like what's going on right now currently with these riots that's going on. People may want to think about this, even though it's happening in Seattle, Washington as we speak. It could come here, and you've got a beautiful city here that they just finished. Do you want to stand by and watch them break plate glass windows? You may want to help the police. I would love to see law enforcement deputize people to stand with them, not necessarily arm them, but stand in back of them or with them or whatever to reinforce them, because it's going to get to that. I hate to see it.
Well, we all do. We're vulnerable if we don't assume, as we the people who founded this country, wanted to empower the people. The government, the federal government is restricted. There are certain things that the federal government is meant to do, coin money, create a military, things like that. But, and protect our borders would be nice as well. But if we the people don't stand up, and if the children are not taught the true U.S. history, and then become proud to be Americans, because they understand what sacrifices were made to make sure that the people who came to this land from Great Britain and were living under the tyrant King George III, where they had no rights and they couldn't practice their religion and they were overtaxed, and they just said, well, we're kind of there now, aren't we? Overtaxed and they're threatening our religions, but they knew when they got here that they had to set up something where the people were empowered and the government was controlled. And right now, government, over the past number of years, people in Congress trying to assume more and more power over the people.
Sure.
So when do we fight back?
And to get back to your original question that you asked me, because I put it off politically to address the chief, people, we need to lead by example. And the family units today are pretty well broken up. Years ago, unions came about, my father told me, to get the people out of sweatshops. And right now, we're getting to the situation where people are just trying to survive, and the family is like shattered. Much like I showed you, I dropped my cell phone tonight. It's much like that. They're shattered. Everybody's going every different direction.
Well, you're talking to somebody who's not a big union fan, but...
Well, I remember we shared that too, at one time you and I did. But I don't want to take over the show. I just
No, you're entitled to say what you believe,
And you remember, I told you I was a union representative at General Electric one time. And I could have still been there today or so, or actually later in life. But as a representative of the union, I represented this group of people. And I had to choose if I was going to take this Hispanic gentleman getting ready to retire 6 months down the road. And I went and told him, I says, I'm your union rep and I'm not bumping you. And he says, you aren't bumping me? I says, no. I says, I'm your representative, right? He says, yes. I said, why should I stab you in the back? I said, I'm 20 some odd years old. I said, I'll go to the street, you enjoy your pension. He got the pension, I went to the street, but I ended up getting a job at the railroad.
well, good for you.
And I don't hold any regrets for it.
Well, whenever we feel that we're doing the right thing, and it turns out with a good result, then we have a right to feel good about that.
Yeah.
So what did you want to say about all this?
Well, so if I could just talk a
Yes.
little bit about the coalition that.
Yes, I was
that I'm
just going to
involved
ask
in.
that. Vermont Police
I'm
Coalition.
the executive director of the Vermont Police Coalition, and I, through the support of a number of people, got this organization off the ground. And basically what it is, it's a organization where we can act as the voice for law enforcement. Because what's happened right at the present time is any law enforcement officer, whether he be a police chief or a patrolman or whatever, that has or would like to say something, they've been silenced. And they've been silenced by, I wouldn't say the administration directly, but indirectly. They realize that if they speak out against something that's not in favor of certain people's ideas or whatever, the next thing you know, they're either targeted for suspension or retribution of some kind. So you don't hear much coming out of Vermont law enforcement, or nationally for that matters. Most of them are clamored and have shut up and been forced to be quiet. And in some cases, agencies have issued directives to their people not to be discussing, anything that's politically sensitive. So for all intents and purposes, law enforcement has been silenced. Now, one of the big things that I would like to point out to your viewers is that, talk to anyone that's in law enforcement and we will tell you that we don't condone bad behavior from within. It happens. There's no way that you're going to prevent it. We go through many, many different forms of trying to screen people to make sure we get the right people. And a lot of times those folks, for whatever reason or whatever, they make their way into the system. And what tends to happen is when one of them does something stupid or criminally intent, that's all you hear about on the news for days and days and days. What they don't tell you about is all the good things that have happened or that are currently still going on behind the scenes that you never hear about. And, I don't know of any law enforcement officer that I ever spent any time in my career that knowingly wanted to allow people to continue to get away with bad behavior. And I'll tell you what's interesting is I sat on I testified before the state legislature when they were talking about a police retention bill, and they were talking about how bad cops went from one department to another and how that could happen and how the police chiefs didn't share information about why this person got done or what have you. Well, let me just give people a little secret. That's
Please.
not so much the police chiefs doing that. That's your legal counsel that's representing your towns and cities that's saying, you know, let this guy resign. You don't have to fire him. He's going to go somewhere else. He'll be somebody else's problem. Now, if people don't think that happens, and I told this to the Senate Judiciary Committee, I said, this isn't just restricted to law enforcement. This is across the board in every profession that there is. It's not just police agencies that do that. Employers do it all the time. You've got a bad actor that works in your company and you don't want to face some sort of litigation or kickback from them, let them resign. They move on. You're going to, well, we're not going to give you a recommendation, but we won't badmouth you either. You want to do the right thing? Make it a law in the state of Vermont that if you fire somebody, you can't be sued for telling the truth. That's a pretty simple solution right there.
Yeah, I
Right?
guess so.
You know,
Exactly.
let's, you know, if our friends in Montpelier want to do the right thing, pass a law that says, if you get fired because you don't show up for work and you're lazy or you're a cop and you're heavy-handed, you can't sue that agency when they reveal that information. What's happening is that, you know, they want to take the easy way out and then blame you when things don't go the way they want. You know, the same people that don't want us to be able to talk about the reason why you fired this employee are the same ones that don't want you to know about maybe perhaps their criminal record or maybe perhaps some of the other things about how much how much they were getting paid on their previous job. I mean, the legislature's got themselves burrowed real deep into too many things that
I
are quite
agree.
frankly outside of the scope of their responsibility.
Amen, I agree with you 100%. So are you saying then that the police chief, or, I guess the police chief, doesn't really have the power or the option to evaluate a person's service or lack of service and to say, you're not doing your job?
In some cases, depending on the charter of your town or your city, the police chief doesn't have the authority to hire and fire individuals, and that varies from town to town. But that being said, generally speaking, when it comes time for disciplinary action against an employee, it involves either the city town manager or city government. They oftentimes call in, legal counsel to get some advice on the best way to go about it. And many times they are told, that you have an option, either you resign or get fired. Now, the legislature and the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council recently changed the rules which say that a police chief is compelled to tell the reason why they let an officer go to another agency, and that agency has to check with the chief of where this person came from, which makes sense. I mean, I'm not suggesting that that's not a good process.
But that's what happens?
But let me tell you something. If you have a town manager that says, I'm going to allow this person to resign, and where do you stand as a police chief if you turn around and tell a chief that calls you up from a bordering town, well, there's two sides of the story here. One, he resigned, but I would have fired him. I mean, is that how you go about it? I don't know the answer to that. But, again, why are we creating this quagmire for the chiefs and say, hey, if you fired a guy, you got justifiable reasons, you can't be sued? It's up to the police chief to do it,
Allow me to back up the chief and what he's saying. Just in Seattle, Washington, the police were ordered to abandon an entire precinct by the city government.
Yeah.
And the chief wasn't for that, but they had to abandon it, and then these folks took it over
Yeah.
for a long time.
Correct. In most cities and municipalities, the chief of police works at the pleasure of either the town manager or the city mayor.
I was just going to ask you, so is it the town government, the manager, what have you, who hires the police?
Typically not. Typically, most agencies have a hiring process where they would go and they would select candidates and then pare those candidates down to individuals that they want to hire. And then, of course, they have to get permission to hire, not necessarily the individual, but a number of positions or whatever they have. And, I'd just like to point out, I'm not throwing the town managers and city mayors under the bus here, because they're acting based upon legal advice from people that you and I, as taxpayers, pay good money for to guide them through this process. So, I don't mean to make this sound like, the city mayors or chief, whatever, aren't backing, they're not backing the chief. What they're doing is they're following the advice of their legal counsel, which sometimes is not the best way to deal with things when you're dealing with employees, but that's what we live in. I mean, people get fired. I can tell you that, I know people that have been fired from places of employment where they have, been caught taking money or whatever, and they jump from job to job to job, and nobody really knows what's going on, because no employer's going to tell a prospective employer, yeah, he or she worked for me, but I let them go because they were taking money out of the till every day.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't hear that.
So if an officer, police officer, is let go for cause, is it common that they go and work for another police department in the state?
To some degree it is, yes. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it doesn't happen, because it does. Not so much here in Vermont, where you've got a small group of people that pretty much, if I don't know the chief, I know somebody that knows him or whatever. But it still does happen, because that's the way the system legally kind of brings it together.
So as a former police chief and police officer through many years, and you worked in the sheriff's department for a while too. So what, if you were king, I always say if I were queen, if you were king and you could make changes that would make the policing better somehow, and the police officers respected and have whatever it is that they need to do their job efficiently and effectively, what would some of those things be? I mean, you'd probably have to go through the legislature and so forth. I don't know. Maybe not.
Well, I'm a firm believer that if a person is in law enforcement and they're doing certain things, and meaning those certain things are crimes that are, egregious, whether it be abuse or, that sort of thing, they should be fired. And they should be fired, and they should be out of the police business for good. One of the things that's happening, though, today that's going to be an issue down the road is everyone wants to be able to justify and file complaints, and I don't blame them against the police, but there are some people out there that would like to have it so that you could file complaints against the police anonymously through a third party, whatever.
Got to be straight up.
Got to be straight up. If you've got a complaint against a police officer, it needs to be straight up, and it needs to be investigated. But I think you have to be careful about, and I'll give you an example. Some agencies have a policy where if I have a complaint against this officer, I go and file a complaint against him. It's recorded as a complaint against that officer, and it may be for excessive force or whatever. If it is not validated or justified or whatever.
The complaint, yeah.
If it's not a legitimate complaint, it needs to go away, and it shouldn't be kept there, because what's going to happen is, depending on where you work, depending on what sector of the city you work, you may be in a tough part of town where you're going to generate, a lot of complaints against an officer for excessive force. So you have to be careful when you start doing those things to make sure that, hey, if you've got a complaint, you bring it, it's investigated.
Be open about it.
It's looked at, and if it's valid, something's going to happen with it. And I think that that's where we need to be careful is, you just start letting people making complaints anonymously. I know some people that had entertained themselves all day long making complaints. So, the bottom line is that I don't think any of us want people not to be able to file complaints, but file the complaints, make sure they're justified, make sure they're, legitimate complaints, and if they are, address them. And depending upon the severity, it can range anywhere from, verbal counseling to a suspension to discharge.
I would guess and suppose that the police officers in general all want to feel like their fellow officers are being above board.
Yeah, I don't think that there's too many people out there in the profession, and I'm sure that there's certain areas, certain police agencies or whatever, but where it happens. But for the most part, you want to be working with stand-up, honest people.
Yes.
I mean, you don't want to surround yourself with people that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, because sooner or later they're going to get caught. And if it's determined that you were aware of that and you didn't do the right thing, and that's the other thing. Most agencies have policies and procedures in place to say, if you see someone violating a policy of this agency, whether it be, mishandling a person in custody or whatever, you have a duty to report
Speak
that.
up, yeah.
And I think for the most part it does. I'm not going to say it happens every time, because obviously we know that doesn't happen.
Well, the police officers that I know here, I don't know them all, but the ones that I've met, I'm very impressed. I really like them, and I feel good about them and the job that they do. I don't know, I don't have a lot of interaction, but I have found them. I have even made it a point from time to time to go into the chief's, the police station, and ask if the chief is there. And then they say, come on, and I go in and I sit and talk with them for a half hour or whatever.
Well,
the same with the sheriff.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is that, a lot of folks don't understand the dynamics that take place in policing. And, one of the things that I would hear sometimes from people when I was the chief was they didn't like the kind of language that the officers used in certain situations. And
Maybe, excuse me, maybe there should be some sort of a gathering, a public gathering with the police officers.
Yeah.
For people to get to know them and maybe ask, go ahead.
I think that would be helpful, but, as I was saying, a lot, occasionally I would get a complaint about, an officer that swore at somebody or used foul language. Let's be honest, that doesn't sound good no matter what, okay? Using foul language, not the kind of stuff you do in front of your mother or your grandparents, but the fact of the matter is that people have to understand, you've got to talk the language of the people that you're dealing with. And that's going to be difficult, and I'm sure some of your viewers are going to be, how can he say something like that? No, ladies and gentlemen, it's the truth. You got to be able to speak the language of the people that you're dealing with.
Yes.
And some of these folks,
They won't get it if you don't.
well, unfortunately, that's what you need to put out there to convey to them that this is serious and you need to pay attention to me.
Yes.
Okay? Make no mistake, this is a dangerous business that we're doing. And, it really has upset me over the last few years that all of a sudden we've got all these experts that want to take a 15-second cell phone video and decide whether the officer's actions were justified or not when they didn't see the preceding 5-10 minutes.
Well, they're looking for a problem.
Well, it's easy if I can edit the conversation and what you're seeing to lead you in the direction that I want you to go in. And, videotapes, officer video cams, all that stuff is great, but they all come with drawbacks. And, you hear a lot of people saying, okay, videotapes, the officer should have the videos on them 24/7 when they're working. They should be running all the time. Well, okay, let's assume that that's the case, and I'm investigating a home invasion, and I knock on your door at 11 o'clock at night because the lights are on, and you open your door in the bathrobe, and in the back, your wife happens to walk across with just her underpants and her bra, and it happens, right? That's going to be made available to the public? Is this what you want to see?
No.
So when you start saying that everything that goes on that camera is open to public purview, you're opening up a whole nother thing. Now, at what part did you get to edit and take that out? That's up to the courts. But those are the kind of things before the legislature gets into making regulations about, the police videos have got to be released. You need to be thinking about those kind of things.
Absolutely.
Because that's what you're talking about. And for a state that prides itself on, privacy of its citizens, I get what you're trying to do, but understand what other areas you're opening up as well.
This cell phone thing has turned out to be a monster because everybody and their brother has a cell phone, including kids.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts from a law enforcement perspective are, the videos, I don't have a real big issue with people if they want to videotape it, but when they're doing it, the reason why they're doing it. And, what I say to people is, and they're talking about, well, in some cases, the police ought to have the audio on 24/7 or whenever they're working. Think about that. And I would say to anyone out there, if I put a recording device on you 8 hours a day and do you realize at the end of the day how many stupid comments you make and how many foolish things you probably do that you probably don't even realize you're doing it, but you would be embarrassed. Big difference between going out and misusing your authority on somebody, and I get that, but, just put some common sense into this thing.
Well, Norm, do you have some thoughts on?
Well, in fact, what I found I'm 75 years old, and I've been driving since I was 16. I've been stopped by officers. I've been stopped by Vermont State Police. I've been stopped by New York State Police. And firstly, I address the officer as I want to be addressed. Treat others as you wish to be addressed. Sorry, officer, or whatever, I didn't realize I did this or whatever. And I've had a good outcome. I haven't received a ticket, thank God, and everything went okay. But again, these officers have a job to do.
Right.
They're human just like us. And they aren't out there, it's not an enjoyable job. And if I was a law officer, when I was a kid in school, I wanted to be a Vermont State Trooper. Well, it never happened. I became an armed security guard instead. However, it's a terrible job. You could pay me enough money to want to be an officer right now.
Well, so what can we do about that to set a scenario where police officers know that they are respected and honored, and we were talking earlier about we need to have an event to honor our police in this county. A pleasant get-together, maybe indoors so that we can control, who might come in to be disruptive or whatever.
Well, I think we may have experienced this, what you're talking about this past weekend, with the rally in Montpelier.
And the Black Lives Matter.
Well, I assume that that's who they were representing, and I also saw some folks there from the Burlington Cop Watch. But
The Burlington what?
Cop Watch, there's a group of citizens there that videotape and go out and kind of monitor police activity.
Looking for problems.
Well, their purpose, according to them, is to make sure that the police do as they're supposed to, which, if that's what they believe, then that's what it is. But I was at that rally, and I can tell you that
So was I.
it was an event to celebrate law enforcement. Jim Sexton, the gentleman who put it together, made it very clear in emails and Facebook posts and other media prior to that event that, listen, if anybody out there has any idea coming here and making trouble, we don't want you here. Don't come here, because that's not what it's about. And basically the event got hijacked by these folks that showed up.
I was so disgusted.
And their purpose of being there was clear right from the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And they came well equipped with bullhorns and big microphone
Posters.
speakers and that sort of thing. And my response to that is, it's shameful, but if Black Lives Matter, the movement, Black Lives Matter, should be addressing that kind of behavior. And I don't see that. I don't see them coming out and denouncing that kind of behavior. I don't see them out there denouncing, some of the things that are taking place across the country. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want to be viewed and recognized as a legitimate, caring entity that's trying to make change, then step up to the plate and do that.
Right.
Tell these people, don't going out and destroying these statues. Don't be going, and if you are, you don't do it under the color of our name. And I can tell you that I was probably more disgusted than I was angered at what I saw there. I saw mostly young people, mostly young white people, who were displaying things about the police, F the police, this, that. I mean, I didn't do it, and a lot of other people, I saw the media said there was a clash between protesters. I was there, I wasn't a protester. I was there enjoying an event. I wasn't protesting anything.
Even when there was a prayer, there were two prayers. They were still, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter.
Well, the first thing I'd say to some of those young girls running around with those posters that they have is, do you eat out of the same mouth that you speak out of? Because it's pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and
it was so disrespectful.
Is that, well, there's no dialogue. It's all F you, no justice, no peace. What's the conversation supposed to be when that's what you're faced with?
It's not about conversation. It's not about interaction.
Well, and the other thing is that this situation with this George Floyd, tragic.
Oh, yes.
No question about it.
We all agree with that.
The officer has been arrested. He's been charged. But some of their folks that they're holding up as their poster folks, aren't the kind of people, they were committing crimes. Mm-hmm. Michael Brown, as tragic as it was that he got shot by the police officer out there, had tried to disarm him, had tried, I mean, there are bad things that happen to good people out there. Use those as an example. Don't go pull a criminal out that got killed in the process of the commission of a crime and use that as your basis of saying what we're doing is wrong.
Why do you think, I'll ask Norm for starters, why do you think so many young people buy into this rhetoric and this anger or at least supposed anger. I'm assuming they're getting paid. I don't know that for a fact, but...
You know who I blame all this on, and I often refer to the gentleman, but I usually use the word gentleman, but George Soros is funding a lot of this stuff. And a lot of these young kids that are into this, when I mentioned you lead by example, in some cases, they didn't come from a family with leading by example. As the chief said, those are the folks you almost have to deal in their language to get to them. It's terrible. And again, they aren't well versed on what's going on. They don't have skin in the game, and it's terrible. It's a sin.
You think they have no purpose other than to do this type of disgusting thing?
I actually think that a lot of it is that this is nothing more than an excuse to go out and conduct criminal activity. I don't think that some of these people torching these places out in Oregon and Chicago and some of those places, I don't think that they really much give a damn about the Black Lives Matter movement. I
don't think this is about Black lives.
Well, I don't think that they're there for that purpose. I think they're there because it's an opportunity to go out and act like the hoodlum that you are and commit crimes and damage stuff. And because what good does it do to do what they're doing when, if your true purpose is to recognize black families and black lives and that sort of stuff, which is fine, then what do you think you're accomplishing by burning down the very cities and towns these folks live in?
Oh,
I don't understand it.
It's reprehensible.
And I can only speak to what I saw last Saturday, which was, the vast majority of these folks were white, younger, I would call them kids, but they're certainly young teenagers and young adults. And, I get it that sometimes when you're brought up in a household with little supervision and little guidance that you're going to grow up to be a little rough around the edges, but there comes a point in time when you're your own person. And in my opinion, your upbringing doesn't give you an excuse to be, a bad person at some point. You need to be accountable for your own actions.
Go ahead.
No.
You know what I did on Saturday? I worked my way up to where some of you were standing up on that platform, but I tried to stay back. But I was watching this group of young people, and I was getting more and more frustrated, to use a good word. And finally I walked over to this one young woman. She had her hair in a bandana and the mask up to here, and Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. I had it up to here. So I walked over to her, and I'm not sure what terminology I used, but I might have said something like, this is disgusting. And she just looked at me, her eyes got all big, and she came right up to me, and Black Lives Matter, and I said, this is useless, I'm not going to bother. I should have tried to be a little more positive, tried to be, but I just had it up to here, and I guess maybe I didn't do the right thing, but...
Well, I think, that rally that Jim Sexton put together, it was intended for people to get together to talk about law enforcement related stories and to recognize some of the people in law enforcement. It was not a protest. It was not an effort to put down the Black Lives Matter movement. It was not an effort to put down anybody or anything. And these folks took it upon themselves to basically come and disrupt it. And, it doesn't help matters, when people will say that, Vermonters are racist and that sort of thing. and that you have implicit biases, whether you know it or not, and then to allow that kind of behavior where those people came there with one purpose, and they achieved that purpose, and somehow or other we're the bad guys. I mean, I don't understand that.
Well, I don't either, and I kind of have to feel sorry for them because there's so much, it's obviously well organized because you don't get a group of people like that together without organization. And I feel badly for them that they're being, in my view, misled. And there's so much positive that they could be doing in life. And they've chosen to be bought and paid for or whatever, promised something to do this. They've been misled and misinformed. Anything you want to add to that?
And I'm not for the local governments, Montpelier, Burlington, painting their streets with Black Lives Matter. Because I firmly believe when you do that, you're emphasizing racism on their behalf. What's the matter with, I thought all lives matter.
Whoever said that Black lives don't matter? Where does
Nobody.
that come from?
I served in the military with Black lives.
They created it.
Well, I was talking with some folks actually earlier today coming up here that, I think everybody's trying to accommodate folks to a degree, and that's part of our problem in society nowadays is nobody wants to step up and tell somebody, no, you can't do that, because if I don't like your answer, I'll go someplace else and try to get somebody else to side with me. I said when the governor and the legislature and the folks in Montpelier gave permission to do the painting on the street up there, I said, there's a reason why we have laws in place, and I don't care whether it was Black Lives Matter, Save the
Boy
Children.
Scouts or
it
whatever.
doesn't make any difference. Once you open that gate, you know that you're going to have somebody else that's going to come up and say, I want to have this painted on the road or that painted. You need to sometimes just say, I understand what you'd like to do, but you can't do it. It's
Set
against the
the
law.
tone.
Well, it's against the law. You can't paint or place stuff in the road.
And if you do there, excuse me for interrupting you, but we're down to a little under 3 minutes. It goes fast. But one of the biggest issues in today's world is that there aren't generally consequences for actions. Even people who commit crimes, you go to court and they say, come back in 3 months.
Well, you could see that. I mean, in a time when the coronavirus first hit and, you and I and everyone here was asked to hunker down, stay home, mask up, don't do this, don't do that. We had people in the state that wanted to open the jails and let prisoners out who, by their own very past history, have a very poor record of complying with the law to begin with. Most of them wouldn't have had any place to go. And, it reminds me of opening up a bird cage, in the middle of a coal mine. It's like, okay, so what's this going to amount to?
What'll it accomplish?
Well, it goes back to you're exploiting the situation. And, it goes back to what I said. The legislature, when COVID-19 hit, should have put the brakes on everything. The only thing that should have been being even discussed at the legislative level was anything that was only mission critical and budgetary necessary until we come out of this. They shouldn't have been dubbing around with all this other nonsense.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Mike and Norm, for coming on the show. You came, thank goodness your wife accompanied you, so you had some company. That's a long drive, 3 hours.
It goes fast.
And I respect you for doing that and for who you are and what you do. And Norm's a great guy as well. He served 26 years in the National Guard, and I thank you for that. You're both people of service to our state and our people and our nation, and there's nothing that can be better than that. I hope you're both proud of yourselves, and I certainly, Mike, wish you the best. I hope you end up in the Senate. We need you. We need someone who has a grasp and an understanding of the legal situations that are happening, and if you think of a way, you have my contact information, if you think of a way that we can put something together that would be productive up here, let me know, okay?
Sure. Will
And I
do.
want you and your wife to have a safe trip home. Norm, thank you so much for
My
being
pleasure.
a friend
My
and
pleasure.
doing all you do, too. Okay, folks, that's the show for tonight, so have a great week ahead, and I'll see you again next week. Good night.